Good morning, good evening, and good day. Welcome to Attack Power Gaming. Thank you so much for watching. Today we are reaching the last tab in our How Not to Suck series at Steel Division 2, the Air tab. Now this is a really tricky tab. It's got a lot of things to go over, so we're going to hop right in. If you enjoy this content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel for more Steel Division 2 content and soon to come Warno. For those of you on the fence about subscribing, this was Jimmy before he subscribed to the channel. And this is Jimmy after he subscribed to the channel. Do you see anything different? I feel like something's different. You should subscribe to the channel. Thanks. No. So, let's get right into this. We're going to go to one of my favorite divisions, personally, the 5th Cav, a Romanian division. We're going to hop right down here to the Air tab. So the Air tab contains a whole bunch of different types of units and stuff, and today we're just going to be going over all these basic types and how to use them in a general sense. This is not specifically about microing your planes or anything about that like that. It's just what kind of units can you find in the Air tabs and what should you consider including in your decks. So let's start with the most basic one that we find in every single division. Even the worst air divisions have some of these. Are fighters. So these are denoted by a little red circle here, and these units are designed to shoot down enemy planes. That's it. That is their main function. Yes, they can nominally attack ground targets. You can target a machine gun or an infantry squad, and depending on the armament and the loadout of that fighter, there's a chance it could pin it down. There's a chance you could kill 1 or 2 troops, but that is absolutely not their function. Their function is to chase down enemy planes and shoot them down out of the sky. They generally have a rather fast speed, okay? Anything 600 plus is a really fast speed. That's a solid, good, excellent speed. 500 to 600 is your average speed. 400 and below, you're starting to get pretty slow. Bombers fly at a 300 some kilometer speed. Some of your really slow fighters, so you can see your 530 for this kind of lighter fighter here. This one's actually quite a slow fighter at 485. You're gonna have a hard time catching up to enemy planes with this, so keep that in mind. So when you're talking about planes and fighters specifically, there are basically 3 main things we want to look at. One, the speed, because we need to be able to catch enemy planes. That's step 1. Step 2, and the big one, is agility, and that's how well the plane can bend and bank around to catch enemy planes and avoid enemy fighters. That's really huge. Most fighters you find them within medium to very good agility, so you can see your medium agility. The third category that we need to consider is resilience. Resilience is basically how much damage can this plane take. It generally defines their health. Most fighters have a bad resilience, which is kind of the average that you would expect for a fighter. Some fighters have medium resilience. These are very strong fighters that they can survive very well. A few fighters have very bad resilience. These are going to die really quickly and should only be used to actually chase down enemy bombers and such. If you have medium fighters, you can kind of do that head-on thing where the 2 fighters just fly into each other and shoot. If you have bad or very bad fighters, that is a really bad plan. The enemy fighter, especially if the enemy fighter is medium, you'll lose every single time. So keep that in mind with your fighters. The other thing you might want to consider is just their armament. Autocannons are the things that do the majority of the damage. Machine guns do far less, but you can see basically how much those things will do in total, and you can kind of total those up and see how much damage output they can have. When you get to these heavier fighters, most of them do a similar amount of damage. They'll have 2 to 4 autocannons and usually 2 to 4 machine guns, or sort of some combination of those 2 things. So that's something to keep in mind with your fighters. You always want to bring at least 1 card of fighters. I always try to have 2, usually 1 in A and 1 in B. You want to really try to have something in A because you don't want to get squeezed out by enemy airplanes early in the game. That's really not a good way to go about things. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind when choosing your cards. So I always like 1 or 2. You can vet them. These you're forced to vet. Vetting increases their agility. It technically increases their accuracy, but that doesn't really make a difference. It's that agility you care about. Depending on how much availability you lose, you may want to consider vetting your fighters. I would never double vet them. That's a little much. But a single vet, depending, could be helpful if you're good with your fighters. If you're not, you're going to want as many as possible. Don't vet them. They function the same basically either way, but you'll have a little bit more bending and curving when they have those higher veterancies. So those are fighters. Never leave them at home. Our next category is Recon, and these are sometimes, I don't use very much Recon. It really depends. Most Recon planes are like this, where they have essentially no armament. This doesn't do any damage, okay? I know it has guns, but it doesn't really do anything. It really won't defend itself either, for real. Don't let it trick you. Don't think, oh, this has tons of machine guns, it'll protect itself. It really won't. It'll get shot down pretty quick. The thing with Recon planes is they see stuff, and that's really all there is to it. They're not very useful for most cases. If you have a very plain heavy deck, then maybe they could if you want to have eyes to spot for your ground attack planes and stuff, especially early in the game. These are only really useful in A. Once the opponent has a really thick AA net, these guys won't do very much. Now, on the other hand, Recon with bombs and rockets and things, these can be super useful because they can continue to see their target even if the target goes to hide. So I really like the IAR-37. It's really cheap, 55 points. It actually is a great bomb loadout. That's a lot of 50 kilogram bombs are small, but having 12 of them, you'll find this thing actually does a good bit of damage. It's considered a heavy bomber, so those three, so this symbol right here, we'll talk about heavy bombers later, but 3 little bombs mean it's actually a heavy bomber. It's very slow. Okay, these biplanes are very slow and they get shot down easily, but for only 55 points, and if you can call it out at the very beginning, can be very useful. But that's what your Recon tab does. Now, if you can get ground attack planes and stuff that are Recon, that's great, but don't prioritize taking Recon airplanes unless you have a specific use for them. You have a very specific, I need to see stuff for XYZ reasons, okay? So don't take those otherwise. The next big category of units are bombers, okay? They can have 1, 2, or 3 little bomb symbols here. 3 bombs is obviously the heaviest, 1 bomb being the lightest. Most of the bigger bombers have the 3. They are heavy bombers. Heavy bombers generally have a speed between 250 and 400 kilometers an hour. They generally have medium to very high resilience, or very good at resilience here. Obviously, the higher the resilience, the better. So in this case, if I was comparing the HE-111 to the JU-88 here, I would actually take the JU-88. Now, the JU-88 has a weaker bomb loadout, so you're going to find that 50 kilogram bombs are not super effective. They just don't do very much damage. 250 and 500 and 1,000, those actually do some damage. Those things will actually kill things. The 50 kilogram bombs most of the time will just simply suppress stuff. Now, it's a little different with attack bombers, fighter bombers. They will fly and drop all the bombs directly in one spot, and that's very effective. But for these bombers, they're going to drop them in a line, so the bombs will fall and go boom, 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 boom across this area. So the truth is only about 2 or 3 bombs will actually hit your target. If it's here, the line will go across and basically miss. So having this plane, this is a better loadout, having 8 250 kilogram bombs, but the very good resilience and faster speed of the JU is more valuable to me because it might actually stay alive. So that's why I would pick the JU over the HE, and that's something to consider when you're picking your bombers. Okay, you have to know what is more valuable. Are they equally able to stay alive? How fast they move? The faster a bomber goes, the sooner it can get out, and that's valuable to have. So their enemy fighters can't catch them, and they have a better chance of getting their bombs off before the AA suppresses them. Don't go nuts with heavy bombers. They have been buffed recently, and they're much stronger than they used to be, but you do not. They're expensive. 125 points. They don't defend themselves. Even with a very good resilience bomber, they get shot down relatively easily. One fighter can get behind this thing and shoot it down pretty quick. So be aware. I use it when they're available and I need ground support, I will take a card, and that's totally reasonable. I don't like taking them in A because then I only get 1 card and it's not that useful. And again, it depends on the availability of the bomber. So keep that in mind. Now, there are 2 different kinds of bombers. We have bombers like this type that drop the bombs in a line, in a heavy explosive line that we think about. And then we have ground attack bombers, which are, we don't actually have any in this division here. We're going to hop out really quick. So this kind, where it's actually a fighter. Okay, if you look, it actually has the same stats as the fighter. Oh, very similar stats, I should say, as the fighter version. Okay, these are actually just 2 totally different planes. I shouldn't compare those 2. But anyway, these 8 kilogram, 50 kilograms I just mentioned are not very strong, but when they're in this type of loadout, all the bombs are going to drop in a singular point, which actually means this will end up being a pretty strong loadout. This will do good damage because all the bombs land basically on top of your target. So there's a very big difference between heavier bombers, which would be this HE-111 here, versus this fighter bomber. These guys will drop very targeted, which is very useful. This will do more damage to a singular target. If you're trying to wipe something out generally, this will do more damage, but this, usually you're going to take these over your heavier bombers. So keep that in mind. Most of the time, if you have a fighter bomber and a fighter that are the same exact variant, but literally just one has bombs and one doesn't, in this case you can see the fighter is the exact same loadout as the ground attack plane. Simply the ground attack plane is slightly slower. You'll see a 60 kilometer per hour difference there. Agility will be lower for that ground attack plane. But otherwise, in terms of resilience and armament, they will be the same. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, this brings us right to our next kind of plane, the rocket plane. So rocket planes essentially are ground attack planes with rockets. These are generally not actually very effective. I do not suggest taking these as your first choice. The bonus, so they don't usually kill stuff. Even though it seems like, oh, that's a 210mm rocket, that's a lot more damage than this. You can see it does 5 damage, 2 is 10. The fact of the matter is they end up missing a lot, and the damage just doesn't, the damage output just doesn't match what the stats say it should do. So these generally are not super strong. Now the bonus of these is that they can shoot their rockets from 750 meters away, so they don't have to fly directly over the target to do the damage, which is huge. So if the enemy has a lot of AA, these guys have a chance of still getting into attack versus something like the actual bomber Falkenworth, or even more so the heavy bomber. You have a better chance of getting, because these guys have to actually fly over the target to do the damage, while these guys, while the rocket plane can be quite far away and still fire the rocket. So that's something to take note of. That is the main difference between them. Generally speaking, though, I don't prioritize taking rocket planes. They're not super strong. Our next category of planes is tank buster planes. Now these planes here, literally it's an anti-tank gun attached to a plane, and they can shoot. They have quite a long range, so you can catch tanks out. The difficult part with these is generally they're quite slow. You can see here, very slow. 315 is slower than most bombers. And these can lose sight of their target. So if this loses line of sight on its target, it will not shoot at it. It will just turn and fly away, which is very frustrating. It's very difficult to use these effectively. They can be very effective. Don't misunderstand. This will kill any medium tank. Okay, 140mm will kill any medium tank. It will have a hard time killing heavy tanks, but if you actually fly your plane around and shoot them from the side, you can very easily pierce a heavy tank that way. So keep that in mind if you're having a hard time punching through a tank. The other bonus of these is these can kill more than one tank on a single attack run. So if you see multiple tanks and you hold shift and you click on multiple tanks to kind of line it up, there's a chance you could take out multiple enemies in a single gun run, which can be really, really excellent, which can be very effective. But it's just, these are very hard planes to use. They're not bad. They're very good if you can learn to use them well, but just be aware, you got to keep line of sight for these guys. And this would be an example where a recon plane would be pretty useful, because it will help keep line of sight for this guy to actually land some hits. So that's a big deal to remember. I always, whenever available, I try to take an AT plane of some sort of plane that kills tanks. I just find them to be extremely useful. The other type of plane that kills tanks is a cluster bomber. These are highly effective. Basically, if you can drop one of these on a tank without it being like any sort of bother, these will always kill a tank. Especially these Ju-87s are super effective. They will kill any tank if you fly over it and drop a successful complete bomb load on them. Now what happens to note, especially you'll notice it very much with cluster bombers, when these guys are suppressed, as in AA has shot at it and the little red bar has filled up, their bombs will literally spread out. So instead of having a cluster strike that goes straight down the line, it'll end up being this huge wide swath of bombs, and you will be far less likely to kill the enemy tank. So just keep that in mind when deciding to send a cluster. And these guys have to fly straight over their target. They need to be really kind of not bothered at all. If they're suppressed in any way, the bombs will be far less accurate. You'll find they'll kill much less consistently. But these are very, very effective. If this is in my division, I almost always take it because it just does so much damage. It's very good. Now the other kind of AT plane, because we do have another type as well, is the AT rocket plane. So I'm going to find myself a division with a whole bunch of those. Here we go. AT rocket plane. In this case, it has 10 of these, which is a lot. I will say that is a lot of AT rockets. That's pretty effective. On the most part, though, AT rockets are less effective than the other two options. The cluster is the most consistently destructive. The tank buster is the second most consistent, and then the rocket planes are the third most consistent. It's not that this won't kill a tank, and especially the better ones. This is one of the stronger AT planes, but the weaker ones that have less rockets and stuff, you're going to find that they're very inconsistent killing tanks, which makes them hard to use and, in my opinion, not reliable. I don't like to take AT rocket planes, especially if another option. If it's my only option, I'll still oftentimes take it because I really like having some sort of AT plane in my deck. I find them, they come in really clutch in some tight situations, so that's why I like to use them. So those are the three types of AT planes and things to keep track of when you are building those decks. Now we have two more types of planes, unless I've forgotten one. We have the Napalm Bomber, which essentially functions like a regular bomber, but these can be really concentrated damage, especially this big one here, this Ju-88S1. Only a few German divisions has it. This is like, it just drops a sheet of fire. It's pretty cool. It can block roads for a little bit. There are some less effective Napalm Bombers, but for the most part, consider these the same as a regular bomber, but they can block off an area for a little bit of time as the fire burns out. That's really the only difference between these guys and an actual bomber. Now, the final category, I'm not actually sure I'm going to be able to find them. Very few units have them. Some older units, they really only appear in some older divisions, is actually an HE cluster. So it's similar to the anti-tank cluster, but it's actually HE damage. It's supposed to be able to kill unit troops and stuff. I find them to be extremely inefficient. I would not use them. I think maybe the 358th have one. Yeah, there. They're not very good. I would not use this unit. Very few divisions even have them to choose, but if you do happen to be playing the 358th or one of the few other divisions that have them, these are not very good. I would not use them. I'd totally skip over them. They don't do enough damage. Just using a regular bomber would be far, far more efficient and far more effective. So that's just something to keep in mind. Those are all the categories of planes. I always suggest when your air tab is generous, like this one is, to have at least 2 cards of your fighters. I like to have 1 or 2 cards of AT planes, depending on how my normal anti-tank is, and then 2 to 3 cards of bombers. So basically a third, a third, a third. Whenever that's possible, I like having a third of each type in my decks. An AT version, an anti-infantry version, and some fighters. I find that to be a good balance. Now, if your playstyle is different, then your playstyle is different. If you just hate enemy planes being in the air, take a lot of fighters. If you hate enemy tanks, take a lot of AT. If you really want to be bombing the crap out of your opponent, take a lot of bombers. That's fine. You can compensate for a weaker air tab with a strong AA tab. And these actually complement each other. If you can take control of the skies and totally kind of block out the opponent's air force, that can be a really effective strategy. You can really kind of dominate a battle if you are controlling the skies. Airplanes are very strong. Be careful with their usage, though. A lot of people call in big 125-point planes to kill a singular infantry squad. That's not really effective. Unless it's a really key engagement or something, there's probably higher value targets that you might want to go after with your planes. Because remember, if this gets shot down, you're out 120 points. If you use this to bomb a 20-point infantry squad, you're out 100 points in that exchange. That's not a good ratio. So you have to be careful. Airplanes are a high-risk, high-reward kind of troop. They'll do a lot of damage. They can really swing a battle in your favor, but used incorrectly, you can lose a lot of points wasting them away trying to get more and more planes, especially when you have a fighter disadvantage. Don't just send junky fighters against the opponent's better fighters and expect things to work out. 2 fighters generally will beat 1 fighter. That's a general rule of thumb, but sending your junk 60-point fighter against this 120-point fighter with a 37mm gun is not going to turn out well. Your plane's going to go down and you're going to lose a lot of those points. So just keep that in mind. A lot of times it's better just to get another piece of AA over buying a junky fighter if you don't have control of the skies in the first place. So I hope that helps everyone. Those are all the tabs of the Steel Division 2 decks that we've gone over. If you want any more content on these things, go check out those other videos to find out the macro ideas of how these different tabs work and how to build them and how to use them in a general sense. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Have a fantastic day.